you very much for attending this very meaningful panel discussion. This is part of the FSU Sesquicentennial project. We have many beautiful and many meaningful and many great presentations. We have the city presenter, and first of all, the first speaker, and Dr. Stanley Johnson is a professor in the history and the government history department. And the second presentation, Dr. Willis McNeil, former chancellor of Fayetteville State University. And the final presentation will be Dr. Jeanette Council. She is the Cumberland County Commissioner. I would like to introduce Dr. Stanley Johnson.
Okay, thank you very much. I guess I should just go ahead and begin. Okay, well, first of all, I'd like to discuss the developments that led to the student involvement in protests here at Fayetteville State. First of all, we had the post-World War II period. There were certain things that had taken place that I think influenced many of us over time. Okay, first of all, you have the first period following the war. You have what? You have the Cold War and the United States taking the position of being what? The leader of the free world. Then you also had other developments before you in the 1940s. You had Ralph Bunche, African American, who was very prominent in the United Nations, and he negotiated the settlement between the Israelis and the Arabs. You see. You also had the ending of the segregated military during the late 1940s. You also had Jackie Robinson going into baseball. You had a series of Supreme Court decisions. One that 1944 Smith versus Allwright ended the all-white primaries. In other words, if these people were going to choose individuals to run for public office, then they could not exclude people on the basis of race. Then you had the Sweat versus Painter case, which I think is the true separate ending of separate but equal. It was a law school case in Texas, and this African American wanted to attend the University of Texas Law School. Well, he couldn't get in on the basis of race. This ended up with the Supreme Court, and they maintained that they could not just deny him because it was a black law school. You just do not duplicate law school like you do automobiles or what have you. And so separate was unequal. Thus, when you get to Brown versus the board, they do have a precedent that wasn't as well known, but when you get to Brown versus the board, I think this aroused a great many people that segregation and what have you tended to be on the way out. You also had motion pictures toward the end of the 1940s that showed African Americans as normal people rather than stereotypes. I'd just like to mention two of these. One called Battleground, which was about the Battle of the Bulge in 1949. You have the chaplain in that movie counseling the troops. You know, they're facing hardship, the Blitzkrieg, and what have you. Well, guess what? You have normal-looking black troops. It's a 1949 movie. You see, I asked my students in class if this was a historically sound scene. Some say no. No, it was a historically sound scene. They brought in troops from wherever they could get them. And you also had another movie called Home of the Brave, which actually featured an African American dealing with discrimination in the military. Well, you have other developments. You have Martin Luther King. You have we've already mentioned the Brown versus the board. And I think that all of these things influenced a number of us. We were here at Fayetteville State. We were aware that things were changing. This situation was on the way out. And a number of us felt that we needed to do our part. People who were going to be professionals, we were going to have to deal with this. And so we may as well start as undergraduates, and so we did go about this. And three of us were part of the leadership level in this kind of thing. I had a role in that. Of course, Chancellor McLeod had the most difficult segment of it because there was turbulence during that summer and what have you, and this kind of thing. Okay, so you do have these developments. We on the campus, some of us thought about this, what we could do about it. Thus, we organized and initiated action in 1963, right along A Street and what have you. I think it's about Jeanette. Now, she lived in the city. I think that she was really someone who was possibly exposed to a lot of danger. Can you imagine a young female participating in civil rights, lived in the city, and but she came through it with safety. Okay, and so we did organize, we did get the marches started. We decided we had this approach, 7 days to noon. We took that from a movie. And we posted 7 days to noon, the first sign on the Cook Dining Hall. That's where we ate during those years. The next day was 6 days, and when it got down to Saturday at noon, we had a crowd in front of the Cook Dining Hall. There, the 7 of us at that time who were the demonstration committee, implored them to join us to go downtown. We also called upon different individuals to be line leaders and what have you, line coordinators in this. Some volunteered and we did. We had another student to join us. It was 7 people in the beginning, then the other student joined us. I would name all of them. Of course, we had Chancellor with us, B. McLeod, former Chancellor McLeod, who was one. We had Sam Dove. We had Roosevelt Davis, Elijah Williams, William Moore. We also had Aaron Plymouth, and myself made 7. After the initial day, James Herrick joined us, and we had the committee of 8. And we took responsibility for organizing and conducting the campaign, and also communicating with the people in the city. I want to say one thing about one of the constitutional questions that came up during that time. People said when we met with the biracial committee that some said, well, why should we negotiate with you? You're nothing but lawbreakers. We said, no, you are the lawbreakers. We said that there was some question about the 14th Amendment. We referred to Article 1 of the U.S. Constitution. We went down to Section 9, which says which states that which prohibits titles of nobility. And we maintain that segregation and discrimination, in effect, gave a certain segment of the population a title of nobility, or titles of nobility, you see, and what have you. And which meant that other people were supposed to be the peasants, and they were supposed to be the lords and barons and duchesses and all of this kind of thing. And we said that the Constitution prohibits this, so you are the lawbreakers, and what have you. And so we went on from there, and what have you. Okay. There are more things that I could say, but others do have things to say. Chancellor McLeod.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for coming. We don't have microphones, and this is such an impassionate subject for me. If you don't mind, I'd prefer standing up anyway for more interaction and feeling each other back and forth. I was born at the end of a cotton row in Sampson County, North Carolina. I grew up in Dunn, North Carolina. I came to Fayetteville State as an 18-year-old football player. Football was the only thing on my mind when I first came. And then I became interested in other things as I started my matriculation here at the university. Ended up being one of the first 2 mathematics majors here at the university. I came here as a young boy, just as naive as a new kitten, as naive and as shy and humbling as I could possibly be. And I emphasize the fact that I came here as a young boy and I left as a man. A part of my developing into manhood was participation in this movement. It had been begun by Jesse Jackson and several others at North Carolina A&T, and then spread across the 11 historically black colleges and universities in North Carolina. And Stan and Jeanette and others decided that Fayetteville was not that much different and we needed to do some things here to make change in this city. And I've always been one who grabbed a hold of causes, and this became a passion of mine. I didn't have a whole lot of idea about what I was getting into until I got into it. It was fun, it was intriguing, it was exciting, and it wasn't until after several months that I realized that, hey man, you all are involved in something that's going to make a difference in changing the economic, cultural, and otherwise climate in this community. And we used to meet right out here in the parking lot behind Seabrook Auditorium. At that time, the NAACP, Reverend Aaron Johnson was a leader in the community, and Reverend Aaron Johnson and the NAACP had what they call commandos, and they would come and train us about what we were going to face as we confronted racism here in this city, even to the point of spitting on us, slapping us, and doing all sorts of things to teach us what Dr. King advocated, and that was peace and nonviolence. And most of us adopted that principle and lived by that. But we had some really, really rough times. Racism was really rampant in Fayetteville, North Carolina at that time. And I remember so well, along with Jeanette and others, Stan, I remember so well what we confronted as we moved through the streets, primarily Hay Street, as we moved through the streets and people would gather to harass us and let us know how they truly felt about us. But we, at that time, had become determined that we were involved in something very significant, something very, very important, and we were going to persist, and we were not going to allow the voices, the actions of racism to deter us. So we persevered. We withstood. Out of that came, all kinds of negotiations with the leadership of the city of Fayetteville, a biracial committee, other committees, and we even got the first sales associates hired at J.C. Penney's and Sears Roebuck stores down where the Prince Charles Hotel is. I still call it Prince Charles. We know it's something else, and thankfully it sounds like it's going to be something else great. But gosh, there's so much I could tell you, and maybe when we get to Q&A, I can bring out some of the other things we experienced. But the primary thing I want you to understand is that because of the actions of students here at Fayetteville State University, people like Dr. Council started to move into leadership positions. She was a pioneer. I was a pioneer. Stan was a pioneer at different levels, at different stages. But when it came down to who's going to put on the garment and who's going to represent us, it was people like Jeanette Council who assumed those roles and those responsibilities. So when you pick up the newspaper or watch TV and you see all the black people, Hispanic people, who are now serving in significant leadership positions. I read about one this morning in this community. It was because of the students of Fayetteville State plowing the ground, paving the way to ensure that there would be opportunities. You hear me? There would be the opportunity for minorities in this community to take their rightful place alongside others to help move this community forward. And 50 years ago, I'm now 75 years old. I was about 20 years old at the time when we were being assailed by sticks and axe handles and tear gas and dogs and all kinds of other stuff. But it is now that I realize that what I did was very, very significant. What we did was very, very significant. And the fact that you are here, especially students, especially you students, the fact that you are here came as a consequence of the hard work we did to lay the groundwork for you. Just a little piece of history, and I'm going to sit down. Fayetteville State was the first black normal school to receive state funding from the General Assembly to support our teacher education program. And that's because, as was said by the gentleman who introduced that bill, because of the commitment on the part of this institution, to train the best elementary school teachers that could possibly be trained. Well, we know what we've gone through now, and God knows we're so proud of that. So very, 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 very proud of that. With that, I'm going to put a pin in, and hopefully I'll come back and respond to some questions later. Dr. Council.
Thank you very much. We are witnessing today true voice and the manifesto of the students of the Cumberland County Commission.
Yes, thank you. I still call him Willis. I'm sorry. He was tiny because he was huge on the football field, okay? Way back there, so his nickname was Tiny. And Sandy, who came, he was from out of town. He came on the bus. The rest of us didn't. But we had no idea that we were part of history, or that we were creating anything. It was just very natural to me back then. I was a recent graduate of to say what I meant and mean what I say. Just very natural to me. I got into a lot of trouble about that because I was a day student. My parents had a business about a mile up Murchison Road. It was called Melvin's Cleaners at 1827 Murchison Road. If I had 2 hours between classes, I was expected to walk back to that cleaners to work an hour and then come back and go to class. And most of the time we got bologna sandwiches from the canteen. You could get them, they were 10 cents a piece, but you got 3 for a quarter. So you could, we would split the difference, and that's where I would eat. But there is so much about that time. We were here during the times. I had just graduated from East Smith. I couldn't even date because I wasn't 16 yet. And my parents didn't allow me to until I became 16. By that time, I was a freshman on this campus. And I met Thomas. Where's your hand, honey? So my first date was in October of that year. And that's when I began to get involved. And he took me downtown in 60, I think it was 1960. There was a huge snowstorm in March of that year. We went downtown to march. I don't even know, I can't even gather my thoughts, okay? So I am doing a lot of rambling because it's hard to get your hands around the fact that you were a part of history, because while you were participating and while you were doing what you thought was the right thing, you know, you didn't think about it. Now my parents, as I said, owned the cleaners up the road. And they were very afraid that there would be repercussions from my actions because I was a day student. These guys got to stay on campus. I had to go home and work. My parents were frightened. They were very, very frightened, very, very afraid for their livelihood. The easiest way to get downtown was to get on the railroad tracks back there and walk downtown to participate. So with the exception of a couple of times my future husband took me, we would walk. I lied a lot back then. I don't lie now. It's too hard for me to remember what I told you, so I'll just tell you the truth. My last punishment was because I had walked downtown. My parents asked me, the Observer was an afternoon paper then, my parents asked me if I had broken the rules. I said, no. You didn't go downtown? No. Well, my picture was in the paper. These guys, I'll go from there with something else later on. But this movement was bigger than us. It was something that I came from a high school where we were afraid all during high school that something was going to happen to us and we were going to have to go to school with the white people. We didn't want to do that. We were very happy and very proud of what we had. We had a totally separate civilization, a totally separate county, a totally separate, the signs were still up to tell you where to go. The signs marking whites and colors. That's what you would see. You went to the balcony of the movie theaters because you couldn't go in the front door. You went around the side and you walked up the steps. And if you were lucky, you got to drop something down on somebody. But most times they guarded that. But we were a part of something that was bigger than us. Not only was I a female, not only was I very young, not only was I a day student, I lived in town, a very separate community. We used to meet sometimes over at the church across the street. But it prepared me adequately for what I would face in life. I don't remember the bitterness. I don't remember hating. I just was inflamed by the injustice. There was right and there was wrong. So I don't take scars with me, and I'm able to meet people as they are. Many years later, when I was working on my master's degree, I was caught in a I guess a civil rights movement. I don't know what it was. But it was Klansmen, and they were on horses going to school. Later, as I worked on my doctorate, I was involved again with the Klan. But this time they came in camouflage gear, and they drove the pickup trucks, and they had the big guns on the gun racks. But I still wasn't afraid, and I guess what we did here prepared us for anything. I learned how to use proper utensils here. I learned that I could ask questions. I learned that my mind was just as good as anybody else's. I learned the value of working together and learning how to trust people and keeping your word. I learned that if you are separated, you are weaker, but together you can make a rope, you know? And that you would be so strong that nobody could separate you. I learned the value of working together for a common cause. For that I will forever be grateful. And throughout my life, leaving that period, I found myself involved in a multitude of activities. Until at one point, I told my husband, we were talking about it, and I said, look, my plate is so full right now that I can't even put salt and pepper on it. So it's time for me to begin to divest myself. Because when people ask and then you automatically say yes, and then you find that you're only giving a piece of yourself, and you want to give your whole self to every cause, because that's the way I learned to do it at FSU.
I don't know if you're going to do questions right now or not, but I want to ask you a question. What are you going to do? What are you doing to make a difference? What are you doing in your space, your God-given space, in your life at this time to make a difference? Because there are, sadly, generations of young people coming behind us who are without guidance, who are without direction, and need a lot of help, need a lot of modeling, a lot of counseling. Even right here at this university, students who are enrolled. I read recently about a program that is designed to offer assistance to students who are experiencing different kinds of problems and issues. What are you going to do? You don't have to answer that question right now. But what are you going to do? I could cite example after example after example, and I want to tell you one little story that really stuck with me. Sam Dove, Dr. Johnson mentioned. We were downtown, again, across from the hotel. As we moved through the streets, primarily Hay Street, as we moved through the streets and people would gather to harass us and let us know how they truly felt about us. But we, at that time, had become determined that we were involved in something very significant, something very, very important, and we were going to persist, and we were going to we were not going to allow the voices, the actions of racism to deter us. So we persevered. We withstood. Out of that came, oh gosh, all kinds of negotiations with the leadership of the city of Fayetteville, a biracial committee, other committees, and we even got the first sales associates hired at J.C. Penney's and Sears Roebuck stores down where the Prince Charles Hotel is. I still call it Prince Charles. We know it's something else, and thankfully it sounds like it's going to be something else great. But gosh, there's so much I could tell you, and maybe when we get to Q&A, I can bring out some of the other things we experienced. But the primary thing I want you to understand is that because of the actions of students here at Fayetteville State University, people like Dr. Council started to move into leadership positions. She was a pioneer. I was a pioneer. Stan was a pioneer at different levels, at different stages. But when it came down to who's going to put on the garment and who's going to represent us, it was people like Jeanette Council who assumed those roles and those responsibilities. So when you pick up the newspaper or watch TV and you see all the black people, Hispanic people, who are now serving in significant leadership positions. I read about one this morning in this community. It was because of the students of Fayetteville State plowing the ground, paving the way to ensure that there would be opportunities. You hear me? There would be the opportunity for minorities in this community to take their rightful place alongside others to help move this community forward. And 50 years ago, I'm now 75 years old. I was about 20 years old at the time when we were being assailed by sticks and axe handles and tear gas and dogs and all kinds of other stuff. But it is now that I realize that what I did was very, very significant. What we did was very, very significant. And the fact that you are here, especially students, especially you students, the fact that you are here came as a consequence of the hard work we did to lay the groundwork for you. Just a little piece of history, and I'm going to sit down. Fayetteville State was the first black normal school to receive state funding from the General Assembly to support our teacher education program. And that's because, as was said by the gentleman who introduced that bill, because of the commitment on the part of this institution, to train the best elementary school teachers that could possibly be trained. Well, we know what we've gone through now, and God knows we're so proud of that. So very, 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 very proud of that. With that, I'm going to put a pin in, and hopefully I'll come back and respond to some questions later. Dr. Council.
Thank you very much. We are witnessing today True Voice and the Manifesto of
Dr. Jones had actually kept a a copy of the newspaper where apparently somebody was arrested and their contents of the notebook that they carried, the student plans for the demonstration, were posted on the Observer. Did that ever hamper any of your plans going forward from that?
Not really. That was a young man from Chicago named Clarence Davis. Clarence Davis, who happened to be a minister, not that that's all. But he had to make notes of everything we say. Look at him and say, Clarence, why you gotta write that down? That just happened to be your name. Why you gotta write that down? But yes, they confiscated that notebook, and as a consequence, we did some tweaking of things, but not of real significance.
Yes, sir.
Did the Fayetteville Observer ever take a stand on its editorial page, whether they supported you or not?
I can tell you about our first meeting with Gibson Prater, was the editor of the newspaper. Okay, now, like I said, we got to the point that people were beginning to take us seriously. Then he called a meeting with us, you see. And he was concerned. He felt that Fayetteville had good race relations, and that what we were doing would imperil the race relations. Well, we disagreed with him and maintained that we are not having the proper relations. We just have what? We just have quietude, but you don't have necessarily good relations, you see. This is why we are acting, because relations are not what they should be. But that was followed by our meeting with the biracial committee and what have you see. But now the Fayetteville Observer at first maintained that, well, they did comment that the demonstrations were very well organized. And this seemed to reinforce the thinking on the part of some that outside agitators had to be doing this, not people here. Of course, now that I felt gave us an advantage, because this meant that they continued to underestimate us, and thus we had the initiative and what have you. When they talked with us, they found that we were informed about the Constitution and what we were doing. In fact, we were more knowledgeable than some of the people who objected to what we were doing, you see. And so, but the newspaper did the newspaper editor was concerned, you see. He felt that problems would arise if we continued, you see. And so that was the concern that they had. And of course, you see the pictures.
Prather had a grandson named David. David was a cub reporter and was about our age. He did a lot of the articles. He became an invisible part of the support system. David supported us. He wrote the truth. He wrote what he saw. But he believed in what we were doing. I wonder where David is now. Should be a publisher or something.
Yes, sir.
How did the faculty react here? And how did Dr. Rudolph Jones, when we were here, take it? And maybe somebody will just mention that. And how did the plans go? Were they well orchestrated? I don't recall having to miss class in my participation, because we put academics number one.
Right.
Everything was doing study period,
Right.
the participation.
Dr. Jones was strict, and but he was not an enemy. You know, he was not an adversary. But he was very nervous. He was very nervous about how what we were doing could adversely impact the school and, of course, his position. But the faculty in general, as I said, was very supportive, I thought.
I have a comment to make about that too. We talked to Dean J.C. Jones quite a bit. Of course, I was from Washington, D.C., And the Justice Department was not a great distance from where I stayed. It's right down at 9th and Pennsylvania Avenue. So in my one conversation with Dean J.C. Jones, he said, of course now one could visit the Justice Department and ask about what could be done if the rights of students are violated because they participate in demonstrations. Could people be prosecuted for violating our rights by taking actions against us, you see? I said, one could do this. Now, we didn't visit the Justice Department, but we did make that comment, and I think that may have helped us a bit on campus. Like you said, Dr. Jones was very concerned, but I felt that he did well by us during that time. Now, when graduation was approaching, this meant that James Herring and I had to leave. And we didn't want to leave, we wanted to stay. And he said if we did stay and reside on the campus, that he would be held accountable for that. And he wouldn't be able to justify our staying on the campus once we had graduated. And we had to agree with that. But he was not defiant or what have you. He was not resistant, I felt, to the demonstrations at that point. Although early on I felt that his remarks were intended to, I wouldn't say intimidate us, but to try to discourage certain things. But during the demonstrations, I don't know of any action that he took that might have worked against him. And he did comment that this professor who tried to intimidate students wouldn't be with the college the next year. So I was, that surprised me, but I was pleased.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
As for student leaders now here at Fayetteville State moving forward, what would your suggestion be for us as African American students in this day and time, facing some of the same obstacles that you all faced when you were here? What way would you, and what suggestions would you give us in handling that moving forward?
I would say that you should try to very clearly identify the difficulties that you face. That's one thing. You want to know exactly what objectives you have to establish, you know. And then you want to try to get students to really get involved in this, you see, to meet and what have you, and try to decide on what you need to do. But of course, you must remember to be orderly and what have you, and this kind of thing, because today you don't have all of the obvious obstacles, you know, the signs and what have you. But you probably can get in touch with what? People who hold office and this kind of thing. Let people in office very definitely know what your concerns are. And see, the more people you have who are concerned, the more likely they are to respond to what you have to say. So I would say that very, very much try to clearly identify just what the difficulties are, the objectives that you have, and then let these elected officials know that you have these concerns and that you do have numbers, and you begin to see what will happen.
Do you know these two? You do know that gentleman right there? You don't? Did you know this lady before today? Okay. Read. I started a program here where, working with the Fayetteville Observer, we would bring newspapers into the dormitory for students to pick up. They wouldn't read them.
They still are.
They still doing it?
It's
Okay.
like kryptonite.
Wouldn't read. Read and ask questions. I know several professors in here, and they are extremely bright people and well-accomplished people. Get to know them.
Yes, sir.
I've got another question. So, I heard you mention Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. I guess the question is, to what degree were you influenced by him in what you were doing? Or was it like, is it just almost like, I know what's right, or it was something else?
Yeah, I was just thinking about that. Just thinking about
This goes back to some comments I made early on. You see, that we were very much aware of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, very much. Because for one thing, that's when things began to involve people on regular, ordinary people on a large scale, you see. That's when you have this change. It wasn't a matter of just the legal people taking action. Now you have regular citizens taking action. And that was very much an influence, that we as regular people can do something. You can organize, you have very clear objectives, you go about things the right way, you're going to get some attention, and you can get results. And so he had shown that, and I feel that he was a big influence, you see, because now it was a matter of what? The regular, ordinary people getting involved. You might not say students or regular, ordinary people, but you see what we're getting at. Not just the lawyers taking things to court, but others being able to take action publicly.
And thank God he was an advocate of nonviolence. Mahatma Gandhi obviously was a big influence in his development and his philosophy. If the movement had not been undergirded by nonviolence, man, we would have had third world. The United States would have become third world. It would have been like the third world, because we talk about the students who were a part of the movement. There were students who were a part of the movement just to be a part, who wanted to cause problems, who wanted, so we had to discipline ourselves, you know. But Dr. King made such a tremendous contribution, obviously, in leading the movement. But to me, his philosophy of nonviolence was the hallmark.
Yes, sir, we'll take. Yes, sir.
Dr. Council, can you talk about the women within the movement? We always hear about the men in the movement, but how were you all treated? Were you, even within the movement itself, not just the opposition, but the people within the movement? You know, you get some men who start saying, okay, y'all just follow us, but we leading this. Can you give us some kind of idea how that was done?
Back then, from my eyes, the men were the leaders. Men were the leaders. And we were more the followers. Now, these guys may know something that I didn't know, because remember I told you that.
And support. We needed somebody's hands to hold when we got back on campus.
There's something else that needs to be said, sir. The majority of the students on the campus were women.
Were women. But the leaders were men.
Yeah, but that's because the women were restricted. You see, the women could not be off the campus after a certain time.
Right.
This is why the men were the leaders. But the majority population was female here. They outnumbered us, and so when you talk about the demonstrations, the majority were women. But the men were the leaders because what? We could leave the campus after hours. We could meet easily. There were rules that kept the women in the dormitories after a certain time. Like I say, Jeanette could participate in the evening because she lived in the city. She and Judith Wilkins Ramsey, Judith Wilkins, that was her name then. Well, they were the two young ladies who participated regularly from the city. But we did have female participation.
You did have female kind of hidden leadership in the movement, because when you go back to the spring of '60 at Shaw University and the founding of Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, the person that kind of convened that meeting and got it started was Ella Baker.
Ella Baker.
Ella Baker, marvelous person.
Everybody ought to know Ella Baker.
And so you had that. Also, when you look at Dr. King's influence, part of it kind of swings around in the sense that while there was support from the governor, the state legislature reacted in reverse. So because of the fear of Dr. King and others, they passed a speaker ban, making it illegal for certain kinds of speakers, basically civil rights speakers, to speak on any public campus in the state of North Carolina, which began again to have some of the national reverb against North Carolina that some of the more recent state laws have done. So that kind of sets some power coming back the other way.
Thanks, Doc.
Would you please give them another big round of applause?
I'd like to say a word about Dr. Johnson in your presence. He deserves a tremendous hand because Dr. Johnson, as it turned out, ended up planning, coordinating, directing, and everything except what Weinstein did. But Dr. Johnson, I call him the man.
Dr. Johnson, would you please stand up and we would like to recognize you.
When I graduated at Willis McLeod, see, have you heard of the Knights of Labor? The Knights of Labor?
Yes.
Yeah, they had a certain leader, but when it took Terrence B. Powder, they took them to that other level. Now, yes, I had the leadership early on. I graduated, but when it was dangerous and things got violent, it was Willis McLeod who was right there in front and kept things going. I mean, people were being arrested. There was tear gas, all of this kind of thing, and he was the person who held firm to the outcomes and to the stated outcomes and all of these things. So I got started. He finished it.
Thank you very much for attending with this very meaningful panel discussion. Thank you again.
John join us after they saw the president's attitude about this thing.
How many times did y'all go to jail?
I went 5 times.
I graduated now when the summer came, things became turbulent. And this is when former Chancellor McLeod really stepped forward and what have you, and did everything and what have you. And that's when people were being incarcerated.
So you never got arrested, Dr. Johnson?
No.
This is the restaurant where we were that I was mentioning earlier when the question was asked about service and the response that was given. Man. Gosh. Man. What a morning. My Lord, what a morning. Ooh-wee, elephant walk, the naked jungle. Lord, have mercy, look at this. There's even a 1956 Chevrolet.
You need to recognize too that the older parts of the community, the more established parts of community, did not see us as pioneers. Okay. It was not, that was not it. We were making trouble.
Man, these are nice.
Making trouble, okay?
Y'all out of y'all place.
Yes, and that it was biracial, but that has been mentioned. It has been mainly 2 races, but the older people were afraid for what they had.
Shall not be moved.
Because of their own experiences. We had the restaurants, the picket lines. I was never arrested either. Maybe I had walked back to go to work.
You were doing it.
But no, but he was SGA president during the time. So he was on the front lines. And as I said, they were campus students, so they were involved 24/7. There's another one of our classmates, raise your hand, Dobbins.
Yeah, Roscoe was.
That's another one back during the day. This makes you become kind of emotional when you look back over your life and you see what you really have accomplished while you were busy planning to do other things, because that's when life happens, while you're planning to do something else.
Yes.
And while you're working together. And my philosophy of being on the Board of Commissioners, and I'm sure that it wasn't the reason I became a commissioner, but my philosophy really is, you can get a lot of things done if you don't care who takes credit for it.
Well said.
You get a whole lot more done in any group if you share. So I learned that here on Fayetteville State's campus. I learned that. I owe Fayetteville State a lot.
We became empowered.
Yes.
We became empowered. We owned something. We began to feel like somebody. We began to feel like, hey, we really are people. Because there was a time in our history and we weren't looked upon as people. We were looked upon as, you know, a commodity. As a commodity. You see, the slave who got the most favor was the one who could have the most children. Why? Because they needed folks to work the big farms. So they encouraged that. That's a whole different topic, time, and place, and I'll leave that alone. But you got people like Dr. Johnson, Dr. Henderson, and others who can give you all that genealogy, you know. And you need to know. Don't be angry. Be happy. Be proud. Be proud. Look at where we are right here at 3 o'clock. On this campus, Fayetteville, North Carolina, United States of America. And what's important is what you do in your space. Don't worry about Washington. Don't worry about Raleigh. Be concerned about it. Pay attention to it. Do what you can. But all that crazy stuff that's going on, you're going to be fine. You're going to be just fine. Okay?
I don't want to monopolize or anything, but I was kind of curious too about what it was like on campus at the time. You gave us a hint about it, that you said the 7 days till noon, right? And then a crowd appeared, and then there were, what about the rest of the campus? What was going on there? Were they all? Was everybody together? Or you mentioned the other community or the more established community. I guess that suggests something about the established community on campus too.
Before Dr. Johnson answered, I would compare that to Iwo Jima. No, 8 days to noon.
Oh,
okay?
Yeah.
D-Day.
I got you.
8 days to noon was D-Day, right, Dr. Johnson?
7 days, yeah.
7 days, however many it was.
It's partly a question about organizing also.
Okay. Well, you asked a question about other developments on the campus during the time that the demonstrations were going on. Okay. Well, a great many of us did miss class. And the newspaper, there were concerns about that, and concerns that we were just out of class, you see, when we should be in school. Well, the president responded by indicating that every person is entitled to 3 absences, from each class, and that it's only if we exceeded these that they would be able to take steps, you see, and what have you. So did have that. Now, I do think that there was a problem with one particular professor who attempted to intimidate students Now, Roosevelt Davis talked about that because he was in the class. And the professor demanded to know just what students thought they were doing. And Davis said he told the professor that students don't have to account to him for what they're doing. They have to account to them what they're doing politically. They have to account for him for what they're doing academically, you see. And of course, I understand that the president, and I felt he was unduly conservative, but this time he became concerned, and that professor was not with Fayetteville State the next year. But on the campus, things were very quiet because so many people did participate. Like I say, the first day, we probably had around 200 people. But the newspaper covered the demonstration and pictured us as out there celebrating as if we were having a very good time, you see. And so we assumed that this meant that they were not taking us seriously. And so, see, we hadn't entered the places of business as of yet. But then when we doubled the participation, this is when we went into the businesses, we sat in and what have you. And of course, this is when we began to get this is when they called upon a meeting with us. You see. We marched several days and what have you, but as things became a little tense, then they decided that they needed to meet with us, you see. And you had the biracial committee, you had different individuals there. They had the president was there and what have you. But on the campus, things did become a bit quiet, you see. But
Most of the faculty supported us. They weren't saying anything. They couldn't say anything. But most of the faculty supported us.
I have one question, please. So with your demonstration, you never had problems with the Klans wanting to come on the campus because they knew that you were students on this campus?
I woke up one morning and there was a cross burning right outside the window of my dormitory over in Hood Hall. There was a cross. But they never came on campus to confront us or harass us. That happened downtown. They met us downtown.
We have a couple more minutes. Any other question? Could you guys?